Hey, this is JT. Welcome to the backyard and welcome to Bodyweight Strength. In this video, what I want to do is answer a question that I'm getting asked frequently, and that is, do I need to take my sets to failure? And the short answer is no, you do not need to take your sets to failure in order to get results. But you'll notice that I have programmed my complete training sessions thus far on the channel with a single set to failure methodology. The reason for that is that the majority of my subscribers and majority of my followers are newer to resistance training, and this is an efficient way to be mindful of someone's time and to stimulate adaptations in both strength and hypertrophy in a minimum time commitment. And I'm going to link a study in the notes to this video, and the study will kind of give you some insight as to why I program these training sessions this way. In the study, what they did is they took two groups of recreationally trained lifters. So these are people who have lifted, they have gone to the gym, they are active, they're just not high level individuals. And what they did is they did one group, I'm going off memory here, but I believe it was 5 exercises, single set to failure of each of the 5 exercises. And the second group, they did 3 sets of the 5 exercises. And what they found is between the two groups, there was no statistically significant difference in strength adaptations or hypertrophy adaptations. So when you look at that, if you can get the same results in doing 1 of each of 5 movements versus doing 3 each of 5 movements, that's 3 times the time commitment for a non-statistically significant difference between the two groups. And the key point, I think, to that study and similar studies is that these are people who are not highly advanced. These are not people who have been, slinging the iron or resistance training for 5 years. Again, these are recreationally trained people that are physically active. So that is I think, representative of most of the people that follow me, right? Some people are working out for the first time, exercising for the first time, coming from being very sedentary, but most are recreationally active and looking for a efficient training system. So that's why I programmed my training sessions at single set to failure, and then you move on. And what I want to point out, and I'll link another study, so there'll be 2 studies linked below. This will be a different study I'm going to link. If your primary goal is hypertrophy, as you start to become a more advanced trainee, there is a dose-dependent relationship between volume and hypertrophy. And so increasing your total training volume is going to benefit you with regards to better hypertrophic or hypertrophy adaptations. So if you're new, if you're going through the training sessions that I've posted and you're doing them as I posted them and you're taking single set to failure, as long as you're not performing multiple sets of the same movement. So for example, you're doing 1 set of push-ups to failure and then you're moving on to something else. 1 set of squats to failure, moving on to something else. If that's what you're doing, that's an efficient way when you factor in time to stimulate strength adaptations and adaptations in hypertrophy. If you get to a point where you feel like you're hitting a wall and you're not seeing the hypertrophy that you think you should be seeing, then there's 2 things that you can do. There's more than 2, but there's 2 main things that you can do. Those things are, you can increase your training volume. What that would mean is now, instead of doing, for example, 5 total sets of push-ups per week, you're going to do 10 total sets of push-ups per week, as an example. If you do this, then what I suggest, and I talk about this in a past video, do not take every set to failure anymore. Stop 1 or 2 reps short of failure, but you must ensure that you continue to apply intensity of effort. Across all research when it comes to hypertrophy and strength training, intensity of effort is non-negotiable. That means you're going to get out of your training what you put into your training. But if you're doing 8 rep sets, as an example, or 10 rep sets, stopping 1 short on a set, stopping 1 repetition short of the point when your form would break down, which is what I consider failure. So that's probably an important distinction also. Failure is not the point where you collapse under a weight or you fall apart during a movement. Okay, failure to me is the point where you can no longer perform a safe repetition. So you should be stopping before that rep where you fall apart. Okay, you should not be taking yourself to complete breakdown. That's not what I would consider safely training to failure. And especially because I train by myself, I'm sure most of you guys train by yourself. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Now back to the 2 things I was talking about. Number 1, not seeing the hypertrophy you want, you can increase your weekly training volume. Number 2, and this would be the first one I would address, if you're not seeing the hypertrophy you want, which I know some of you are not, if you're not seeing the hypertrophy you want, you don't feel like you're gaining muscle fast enough, then you want to look at your diet. Because if you are going to increase your training volume, okay, so now you're doing more total sets per week, more volume per week, but you're still going to eat the same as before, and you were already not seeing the muscle growth you want, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to continue to not see the muscle growth that you want, okay? But you're going to add additional stress to the central nervous system, additional stress to your body, and you're not going to further training adaptations. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. You've got to eat to maximize your training. If you are newer to this and you started out and there's the newbie gains, the noob honeymoon, whatever you want to call it, so you're making strength adaptations, you're building muscle, and then you feel like everything's starting to grind to a halt, keep in mind that progress in strength training is very slow over a long period. Okay, it's a long game. No one's getting huge in 6 months. No one's getting super strong in 6 months. It's just not how it works. You can lose a lot of fat in 6 months. You can lose a lot of weight in 6 months, but you're not getting jacked in 6 months, and you're not getting super strong in 6 months or even a year. So keep in mind it's a long game. But also, harken back to what I just said. When you start to feel like things are slowing down for you, look at how you're eating, okay? Make sure that you are addressing protein. First and foremost, 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body mass as the floor. Okay, you can take it higher than that, but that's the absolute floor. I would suggest going closer to 1, maybe even 1.2. After that, look at your total dietary energy. Okay, if you're eating a severe caloric restriction, a severe energy restriction, it's going to be really hard to get strong, and it's going to be really hard to stimulate a lot of hypertrophy. You can gain muscle and you can build strength in a caloric deficit for sure. So if you're dieting and your primary reason for resistance training is preservation of lean tissue, that's awesome. But when you get to a point where that goal starts to change and you want to really go after increased hypertrophy, increased strength, that's where you have to really start manipulating your diet. That's also, I think, an important distinction for me to make. Increasing your training volume is a driver of hypertrophy, but increasing the training volume is not necessarily a driver of better strength adaptation. So if your primary goal is to get stronger, which I train first for strength, hypertrophy secondary, you do not need to increase your training volume, or that's not the first thing that you should do. So if you feel like your strength is stalling, just doing more work is not how you increase your strength. But that's beyond the scope of this video. We can address that in a future video. In this video, we're talking about sets to failure, and if you need to take your sets to failure. And to recap, no, you don't need to take your sets to failure. Sets to failure is if you're performing low overall training volume, an efficient way to be mindful of your time and stimulate strength and hypertrophic adaptations. If you're going to start increasing your training volume, first, make sure you're eating to support the increased volume. Second, then add training volume for the purpose of increasing hypertrophy. Adding training volume is not how you're going to get past a strength plateau. And what I talked about in a video that I shot last week was how to use a technique that is made popular by a guy named Pavel Tatzelin. It's called greasing the groove. That's a really good way to help you get past plateaus in strength. I will link that video at the end of this video, and I will also link it in the video notes, so you can go check that out if you feel like your strength's hitting a wall. Hopefully this video was educational for you, and hopefully I didn't babble too much. Definitely try not to do that. But if you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you sticking with me. And as always, I appreciate you supporting Bodyweight Strength.